Okay, I've got a bit of a Big Finish problem. Not just that I spend too much money on it, which, yeah, I do, but also a storage problem. This pile here, particularly, is the problem. I don't like clutter, and just having a pile of CDs on the floor really irks me. But I've run out of shelf space. I have completely run out of Big Finish shelf space. I have nowhere else where I can reasonably put shelves in my house that will not encroach on some other area. This is the Big Finish area. This is the area. This is the Doctor Who area. This is where I film my videos. This is the space I've got. And I've got to live with that. Am I going to get rid of any? No. But I am going to have to pack some into storage. So before I do that, I thought I might as well do another Big Finish collection. It's been a while. I think maybe about 4 years, maybe even 5. Don't know, would have to check. But it's been quite a few years since I did a video looking at my Big Finish collection and all the CDs I have. So that I've gotten quite a lot more since then. We better get on with it. And then at the end, I'm going to pack some into boxes and put them up the loft. It's sad, but I've got to make room. But first, what have I got? Let me just pause here to say this video was recorded in late 2023. It's over a year old. I know, I'm sorry it took me a while to edit it. That's the understatement of the century. But there will be an update at the end of the video with more recent purchases. So this is still a 2025 collection update. Just the more recent stuff is at the end. Anyway, as we were, because I've done one of these before and because I don't want this video to be an hour long, while I will show every CD, I'm not going to name or talk about every CD I have. The first thing to note is that I put my CDs in Doctor chronological order where possible, with non-Doctor spin-offs at the end. That means where they take place in terms of the Doctor's life. The second thing is to say that at least 2/3 of this collection is 8th Doctor stuff. I'm a big 8th Doctor fan is what I'm saying. But before we get to the 8th Doctor stuff, genetics of the Daleks. Yes, the earliest Doctor I have on these shelves is the 4th Doctor, and the entry into the Time Lord Victorious multi-platform story, Genetics of the Daleks. I do have other earlier Doctors on download only, but that's a whole other video if I ever get around to creating it. Let me know if you'd like to see a digital Big Finish collection video from me at some point. No promises though. Took me a blooming year to edit this one. Back when Time Lord Victorious was coming out, I did a whole series of videos detailing how all the stories fit together called the Canon Update, so do check out that if you want to learn more. Other 4th Doctor stories I have on CD are The English Way of Death, then Night of the Vashna Dorada, which was part of the Classic Doctor's New Monsters box set series that in each story pairs a classic series Doctor with a revival series monster. You'd get 4 stories in each box, each with a different Doctor, and back then when this particular box set came out, each story had its own case within the box, so I'd split them up and put them in the right place in the Doctor's timeline on the shelf. I'm sure somebody has their pitchforks at the ready for such an action, but look, it's the way I like to do things. Unfortunately, I can't do that anymore, but I'll come to that later. Spare parts. On to the 5th Doctor with this absolute classic, still some of the best stories Big Finish has produced. Basically, it's Genesis of the Cybermen before they release something called Genesis of the Cybermen, and a loose template for a couple of TV stories since. Then we've got a run of more of the classic Doctor's New Monsters, next with Empire of the Rachnos and Fallen Angels for the 5th Doctor, and the Karenite Curse and Jadoon in Chains for the 6th. Real Time was originally a BBC animated webcast, although one that utilised Big Finish original character Evelyn Smythe. Big Finish struck a deal to release the audio separate from the animation, and here we are. Sadly, it ends on an unresolved cliffhanger, as the intent had been to make more that never materialised. For the 7th Doctor, I have the Lost Stories Ice Warrior story, Thin Ice, the rather good Enemy of the Daleks, and another classic Doctor New Monsters release, Harvest of the Sycorax. And then we're on to the bulk of my collection, the 8th Doctor. But not the one you were expecting. Because before we get to the Big Finish 8th Doctor releases, we have some BBC audiobook original stories, The Scent of Blood and The Code of Flesh, which I have decided to place as his earliest audio adventures in his timeline. Yes, despite the second one using Night of the Doctor image on the cover. that outfit isn't supported by the story itself. Next we have Company of Friends, which technically have 4 stories across various points in the 8th Doctor's life, but as one of them serves as his introduction to Mary Shelley and his adventures with her, is that one that I'm basing its place on this shelf. Talking of which, we then have the Mary Shelley, the famous writer, as companion stories: The Silver Turk, The Witch from the Well, and Army of Death. Then the 8th Doctor version of Shada, which again was an animated thing originally on the BBC website. Before we then head into the famous Doctor and Charlie Pollard adventures. Now, originally, I wasn't very keen on Charlie as a companion. No, put those pitchforks away. I've warmed up to her a lot over the years, and now delight anytime she returns. So yeah, please put the pitchforks away. I like Charlie now. And return she did, like in the box set Charlotte Pollard, The Further Adventuress, which takes its place on the shelf where it happens in continuity, as does the 8th Doctor adventure in the 3rd Classic Doctor's New Monsters set, which sadly, due to the change in packaging design, could no longer be split up, so each story take its rightful place. So if there's a box set with multiple stories and a different Doctor in each story and they can't be separated, then I will place it wherever the 8th Doctor story takes place, because the 8th Doctor is my priority on these shelves. Back to the decades earlier releases of the 8th Doctor and Charlie adventures now. Having worked in the radio drama department at the BBC myself in the past, I of course loved Invaders of Mars, where the classic radio drama War of the Worlds factors prominently in the plot. I said this last time, but I really need to re-listen to Chimes of Midnight because my memory is only so-so, but it's often lauded as one of the best, but I haven't listened to it in probably a decade by this point, so it's well overdue a re-listen. Maybe I'll save it for next Christmas. The 8th Doctor and Charlie adventures continue now onto the next shelf via the frankly batshit crazy Zagreus and the strange Divergent Universe arc. As I have said, I recorded the video for this a long time before the voiceover, so I can tell you now that there is a recent Sontaran vs. Rutan War release featuring the return of Kariz for the first time in 20 years, which is fantastic. There are also some extra releases on that top shelf now, like the Doomsday release with the 8th Doctor story. I'll go through those at the end of the video. The End of the Beginning was the final release of the monthly series, and of course featured all Doctors that have been part of that series, the 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th, but of course it goes here because 8th is king. Then it's Bye Bye Charlie and Hello Lucy Miller. I originally listened to these on digital radio station BBC 7, which has now been renamed BBC Radio 4 Extra, and gradually picked them up in sales many years later. Placed between Series 1 and 2 is the box set released years after Sheridan Smith had last played the role, The Further Adventures of Lucy Miller, another nice nostalgic feeling set, before we continue with the full Series 2 and 3. I'm going to highlight the bonus release, An Earthly Child, which reintroduced the Doctor's granddaughter Susan and introduced us to his great-grandson Alex, played here by Paul McGann's real-life son, a plot thread which would be picked up again at the end of the series. Then we've got the 50th anniversary special, The Light at the End. I do love a multi-Doctor story, and even if we've got a bit too many of them in the last decade, we haven't reached that point here. And I definitely prefer this over Big Finish's 60th anniversary celebration specials. Next on the shelf was a new era for the 8th Doctor, the box set era, starting with the award-winning Dark Eyes 1. My copy here is signed by Nick Briggs. I think I got it signed at the BBC's official 50th celebration convention, but I don't fully remember. After Dark Eyes, there were the 4 boxes of Doom Coalition, my favourite of the box set era, which introduced the amazing Time Lord villain The 11, played by Mark Bonar. Then there was Ravenous and Stranded boxes. Side note, kind of annoyed me that the final Stranded box had a slightly different cover style, dropping the more stark Rorschach test against the solid colour looking patterns of the previous set. Myself and YouTuber Jessie Gender did reviews of the first 2 Stranded box sets together, one on my channel, one on hers. I'll leave the links below if you want to go and watch them. Next are the 2 box sets featuring more standalone stories with 8, Helen and Liv. And then we have another set that is here because of where the 8th Doctor story in it goes, despite it having other Doctors in it as well, the Peladon set. I listened to these having never seen the Peladon stories, so I didn't have the full background, but they were still very accessible and enjoyable. I've now seen the first Peladon story, so maybe once I've watched the second, I'll go back and listen to this again. Next is where I put the trilogy of 8th Doctor Time Lord Victorious releases. I really liked this multi-platform event, and these were probably my favourite bits of it. It's wartime now, Time War time. I don't usually get War Master stuff on physical CD, but I do when it includes the 8th Doctor, and it's where it fits in 8th timeline that determines its place on the shelf. It's really interesting seeing these two incarnations face each other. Next, I put the Sontaran ordeal from Classic Doctor's New Monsters Volume 1 set. Given the line in the Sontaran stratagem about how the Sontarans weren't allowed to take part in the Time War, it's fascinating to hear how they tried to nudge their way in this. Then I put Day of the Vastra Narada from Volume 2 of the Classic Doctor New Monsters, which brings me sadly to the end of the 8th Doctor audios on my shelf at the time of recording this video, which was a long time before recording the voiceover, admittedly. Again, stay till the end, you might get a little catch up of what I've bought since. Then Night of the Doctor happens and we're on to the War Doctor. First on the shelf is the excellent War Doctor Begins set with Jonathan Carley doing a supernaturally good version of the War Doctor. Seriously, if I didn't know, I would assume that was a younger John Hurt. He must have cast an incantation and sacrificed a goat to be this good. But of course, the king is the man himself with 4 sets that John Hurt recorded before his sad death in 2017. Christopher Eccleston agreeing to reprise his role as the 9th Doctor for audio was huge, given his distancing himself from the part since he left the show, and his known unhappiness with how he felt he was treated by those in charge at the time, and I guess those in charge now. We never thought we'd have him back as the 9th Doctor, but good old Jason Haigh-Ellery and Nick Briggs over at Big Finish convinced him, and we still have an ongoing series of box sets to thank for it. I got the first 4 all on pre-order, but due to needing to tighten my belt a bit, cost of living am I right, I needed to cut back on my Big Finish buying a bit, and while I enjoyed these sets, they no longer felt essential, so I decided I wouldn't get any past Volume 4. But then they released a set with guest appearances from Liv and Tanya from the 8th Doctor range, so I kind of had to get that one. And then they only go and cast my friend and co-host of our Red Dwarf podcast, Everybody's Dead Dave, Adam Martin, in a big role in another box set, so I had to get that one. And they made him a temporary companion that stretched into the next box set, so that was another one I had to get. Basically, every time I think I'm out of this range, they drag me back in. It happened again recently in the box set when he met River Song, but I only bought that one on digital. In terms of David Tennant, I only have the first of the David Tennant starring box set releases. It's a solid set, but with so many other rangers I was invested in, I didn't want to go beyond that first set. I have the 4 short trips releases. I may split these up and put them where the 8th Doctor story in each set takes place, as that is how I've done with the other releases with multiple Doctors in, but for now they're here. I don't know why I didn't do that before. And then for a little bit we're away from Big Finish and into the world of BBC Audio exclusive audiobooks. Cheeky Time Lord Victorious release in the mix there as well. I collected most of these through the Tennant and Smith areas, but fell off at Capaldi with only one release being bought, The Lost Planet. At some point I do need to go back and catch up on them, if not buying them physically, at least listening to them digitally. For the 2 15th Doctor releases so far in this audio exclusive audiobook range, I've gone digital for those. And then we're on to another range I collect everything of on physical CD. Along with the 8th Doctor story, Scaredy Cat, the first release of this range was my first entry into Big Finish listening 20 years ago. God, I feel old. And while it took me a while to catch up, similar to the 8th Doctor, I gradually bought the releases as they went into sales over the years, until now I buy them on release. This has always been an amazing range, from the West Wing style political drama of the early years through the slightly more fantastical world hopping period, and now the Time War era that they're currently in with their releases. I mean, definitely check this series out if you haven't already. Talking of the Time War, Susan's War was a fantastic release which brought us the most up-to-date on the whereabouts of the Doctor's granddaughter we have ever had. And it was great to hear both Carol Ann Ford and the now sadly departed William Russell back in their roles that started the show. As I record the audio to this video, there is an impending second release in this series which hasn't quite come out yet, but I will be buying. Now, Doctor Who audio drama didn't start with Big Finish, and this box set collects BBC-made audio dramas from the 70s through to the 90s. They're of varying quality, but there are some interesting installments and some good stories here. I mean, it's well worth it for a bit of Doctor Who history. This is a little vinyl sample of the Evil of the Daleks LP release that I think might have come free in an issue of Doctor Who magazine. I don't own a vinyl player, so I've never listened to it. And another freebie from Doctor Who magazine that I think was a promo DVD for the collection Blu-ray sets. And now let's move over to that unsightly pile next to the shelves. This is why I need to put some of these into storage. I can't be having piles like this cluttering up my room. I picked up a bunch of random Jago and Litefoot box sets, very cheap from a charity shop many years ago. It's an enjoyable series, although it's never been high up enough on my priority to track down the rest. Maybe one day. I have a handful of Bernice Summerfield audios I've picked up in sales over the years. Oh No It Isn't, the very first Benny release. Then there's Just War, taking place in Nazi-occupied Guernsey. The Ice Warrior story Dance of the Dead, Death and the Daleks, and the Timeless Passages from Series 6 of the range. Then we're on to Torchwood, with a box set full of full-cast audio dramas produced in-house for BBC Radio 4, and some Torchwood BBC audiobooks. Then, back to Big Finish. I've got the first 7 in the monthly Torchwood range that I won in a competition that a blog/podcast The Time Ladies were running. I have bought myself more Torchwood since, however to save space I've stuck to digital for these, and mostly just buying the ones set after Miracle Day. The exception to that digital only rule for Torchwood after this was the first box set of Aliens Among Us, because at the time I bought it, it was in a sale that had it at the same price as the digital only version, so it kind of seemed silly not to get the physical release in that instance, as you also get the digital download as well, included in the price, so it just kind of made sense to get that one. But I think I've got the rest since on digital. And finally, Units. This is another range. I try and get most of them on physical release, starting with the original Unit series from 2005, which starred a certain David Tennant, just before he took on his more famous Doctor Who role. This time, he was playing Colonel Ross, and I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of this, Brimacombe Wood, I think. Colonel Ross Brimacombe Wood. And then I've got a bunch of new series unit box sets featuring Kate Stewart and Osgood, Extinction featuring the audios, Shutdown, Silenced featuring, you guessed it, the Silence, Assembled featuring the Silurians and some of the classic 1970s unit folk, Encounters featuring the Daleks and Sontarans, and Cyber Reality, yep, that's the Cybermen box set, and then my final CD for this main section of the video, recorded over a year ago, Charlotte Pollard Series 2. I think I've got the first one on digital, and with that, it was time to pack a whole bunch into storage and reorganise the shelves. But the video doesn't end there, my friends. You've stayed this long, so why not stay for a quick fire update of everything I've bought since. And I do mean quick fire. I'm not even going to speak during this bit. You're going to have to watch the screen very carefully. Ready? Go! Really is now my 2025 collection. So, which of those releases are your favourites, and what gems am I missing out by not owning on CD? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more collections, then check out my huge Doctor Who book collection video from a few years ago. There are over 200 books in this video. To see that, click on screen now.